Okay, I'd like to thank the Center for Latin American Studies here for their invitation. I'm always looking for an opportunity to escape the winters in Michigan. I have a question for you, though. How many people here have played any sport? Okay. Who told you to, what sport did you play? Who told you to play soccer? Okay. Okay, that's a very good explanation. Sports are very important because at the end of the day, they might come as a recommendation from a friend, from family, from somebody that you know, right? But at the end of the day, it is your choice, right? Soccer or any other sport is your choice. It's like your favorite drink or the people you hang out with or your partner or the shoes that you're wearing, right? It's your choice. Nobody's telling you what to play, where to play, when to play. So soccer, in that regard, is a very important sport as any other sports, right? You choose the sport that you play. And when you analyze the sports that some community participate in, when you analyze the sports that some human groups participate in, you have a chance to learn about their choices. You have a chance to learn, how they want to see themselves in life when they are not working, right? The reality is that many of us play sports and that very few of us have participated in professional, right? I teach sports history at Michigan State, and I always say this: there are two types of athletes, the one that pays to play, right, and the one that is paid to play, right? And the majority of us, we pay to play, right, because we want to participate. It's our choice. So when you analyze how people choose to participate in sports, you also analyze how these groups are seeing themselves in society, right? You analyze how they have a vision, not only of their present, but also their future in a particular society. And when you analyze the participation in sports by immigrant groups, you can see how these immigrant groups or how these groups of people see themselves in a particular society, right? So what I've done in my research is to document, to investigate the ways in which Mexican sporting communities have developed in the United States. When did Mexicans start to play sports in the US? And what type of transformations we can witness in this process throughout time, right? And what I came to the conclusion at the end of my research is that Mexicans have three different ways of participating in sports. Number one is the immigrant sports community that starts in the 1920s and continues until the 1960s, in which they are trying to assimilate into the host society, right? These immigrant sporting communities, people come to either Detroit or Chicago or Los Angeles or Houston in Texas. They participate in sports and they want to be seen as a successful immigrant story, right? In the second stage of this process, the transnational sports community that goes from the 1960s all the way up to the 1990s, what you see is a process of consolidation of the community both in the host society and in Mexico. There is a process of activation of transnational networks in which practicing sport has repercussions both in the host society and in the country of origin. And then the third and final stage that I identify is the global sports communities, in which there is a compression of time and compression space, and there is a consolidation of these sporting communities in terms of being able to have a decisive and permanent influence both in the place of origin and in the place of destiny, right? That is, in these global communities, the sporting groups have already learned to master the best ways in which they can feature sport as a recreational activity, and they have learned to master the global networks through which they can participate in sports. And today we're going to analyze this process using the example of the Mexican communities in the United States. So we're going to start here with a picture that is not in the US, but in China, right? There are many definitions of globalization, right? Globalization is seen as this process by which there is a compression of time and compression of space. There is a permanent interconnectedness between capitals, human groups, ideas, and cultures, right, that goes across the globe or across different countries. And one of the ways in which you can visualize globalization is by appealing to photography, right? I am a trained photographer, and I can show you this picture from China. What do you have here? Who is this person? Say that again? It's Jessica Alba, right? But she's advertising, or she's in an advertising piece that has signs in English, signs in Chinese, right, and a telephone number. Can anybody tell me what is this ad about? No, you can't, right? Because you don't speak Chinese, right? It doesn't matter how much, how long you're going to look at it. You're not going to be able to tell me, right? This is an illustration of the process of globalization. It's a juxtaposition, right, of images that come from different parts of the world, right, to create a third effect, right? This ad is not directed to an English-speaking audience, so you're not going to be able to learn anything except that it says over here, King Street Shopping Plaza, right? That's the only thing that you can decode, right? This ad is directed to a Chinese audience, right? And what it says is that there are openings for that shopping plaza in which you can rent a local and then offer different types of merchandise. So what is Jessica Alba doing here? What is she doing in China? What is the meaning of her participation? I know because I teach Chicano history that she's from South Texas, right? But I doubt that people in Shandong, China, identify her as a Mexican-American actor, right? So what is she doing here? How about you? It's another picture. Yep. Anybody? What is the role of the model here? What is she telling the audience? What is the connection between her looking at you and the shopping plaza? What is she telling you if you're Chinese? If you shop in the plaza, what is going to happen to you? What? You're going to look like me, exactly. This is you. This is you after you shop in the plaza, right? This is you after you shop in the plaza. That's the message, right? That's what she's doing there. That's exactly what she's doing there. If you shop in this plaza, this is you after, right? Now, this is what we call in photography, the generic cosmopolitan model, right? Because she's not clearly American, but she's not clearly Asian, and she's not clearly Mexican either. So she's a generic cosmopolitan model, right? She represents the world. If you shop in this plaza, you're going to look like me. You're going to be a cosmopolitan person. And here you have this example of compression of time and compression of space illustrated in this visual, right? You have the plaza, and then you have the Eiffel Tower, you have the Statue of Liberty, you have a Chinese monument, you have the Australia Opera building, and then you have a building from London, right? This is globalization in terms of marketing, compression of time and compression of space in order to create a third and different effect, right? In order to produce something that was not there before the mixing of these elements. And this is exactly what's going to happen to the sporting Mexican communities in the United States. at the end of the process, they are going to become these global networks that provide entertainment and recreation to these communities using the capitalist model of marketing and big-time entertainment industry in sports. And we're going to see that in detail when we analyze what exactly the Mexican national team is doing in the United States, okay? So here you have another example. You have here the view of Jessica Alba, the shopping plaza, and the future buildings. This is the details of the buildings I just told you about. And this is another ad in the same model, right? Now this is another example of globalization, right? Here you have a traditional Chinese structure that is dedicated entirely to sell counterfeit European products. So you can buy Armani, Gucci, Prada, every single European product counterfeit, you can buy it here in this traditional Chinese structure, right? Here you have, she was not very happy with the picture. And here you have the same model, and I like this a lot because you have the Buddhist monk with his counterfeit European merchandise going home really happy, right? And we're used to this type of images. This is Starbucks in China, but this is my point. This is what I'm, I had to go to China to show you, examples of visual globalization. When you put together two elements from different contexts, you generate a third and unique effect. You generate something that was not there before, right? And this is my best example that I could come up with. You have the Starbucks coffee shop, right, in this Chinese traditional structure, right? They have the sign in Chinese in the back, but at the front they have, the sign of Starbucks. Okay, here are more examples. This is also from China. They are celebrating, you tell me, what is it that they are celebrating? Who's that guy? Well, you're not my student, so I cannot offer you extra credit, right? But that's Osama bin Laden, right? And this picture is in China. He's in a beach in China, and they are celebrating the death of Osama bin Laden in a compound in Pakistan, right? This is another one. Who's that guy? Is that Obama or is that Mao? Or is that what they call in China Obama, right? You see, this is another example of globalization, right? When you are witnessing or participating in the juxtaposition of traditional elements to generate a third and different effect, right? And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in the history of Mexican sport communities in the United States, right? This is the Club Social y Deportivo Mexico. They are originally from Detroit, right? They started playing in Detroit in the 1950s. Let me see, here. They started playing in Detroit in the 1950s. The majority of these men were workers in the Ford Motor Company, auto industry, right? They came to Detroit. They did not play soccer in Mexico, but they decided to start a club named Club Social y Deportivo Mexico in Detroit because they wanted to participate with other national groups that were practicing soccer on a regular basis, right? In other words, in the 1950s and 60s, this group of Mexicans want to participate in a recreational activity in which they can compete against other nationalities at the same level, right? They work next to workers from Poland, next from workers from Germany, next from workers from Italy, next from workers from Portugal, next from workers from Iraq, right? And they want to participate in the International Detroit League because that is going to bring some sort of credibility, respect, and social status to the Mexican workers, right? That is, if they can show that they can play at the same level against European immigrants, they can show that they can be as successful as the European immigrants were in working in Detroit and in Michigan in general, right? And this is an example of the immigrant sports community. They are not soccer players. It's not that they wanted to play soccer their entire life. Some of these people, I interviewed them, some of these people used to play baseball in Mexico because in Mexico, baseball was the most popular sport all the way up to the 1950s and 60s, right? So some of them had some previous experience playing baseball, but once they come to Detroit, they start playing soccer because they want to participate at the same level with other immigrant groups. Now, the fact that there is a club that is both social and deportivo, that is, sports and social club, is not irrelevant. Because what they're doing also is that they are articulating a way in which they can plan for social activities after work. They're going to get together not only to play soccer, but also to have parties, to organize dances, and to participate in recreational and social activities as a community, right? So the moment you see the formation of such a team or such a club, that moment you can date as the moment in which they are trying to see themselves in the United States as a successful immigrant story, right? This is the moment in which they are organizing their after-work recreational life in such a way that they want to show everybody that they can be as productive and as successful as anybody else, right? Here you have another picture of the Club Mexico in Detroit. And what I did in my historical research is that I followed the trajectories of these people before they got to the field, once they play in the field, and after they stop playing. And what happened is that I found that there is a very close connection between sports participation and participation in social and then political activities. That is, these people, once they retire from the field, they started to participate in committees to celebrate, for instance, the Mexican Independence Day, in committees to celebrate the 4th of July. And then from there, these organizations evolved into producing political leaders that had some sort of a representation in the Mexican community in Detroit. So there is a very close connection between participating in sports and becoming a political activist. And because of that, in my written work, I call this era the era of the student, no, not the student, the era of the athlete activist, right? They are going to do everything in the field and off the field to represent their community. They are going to show people that they can play and be at the same level as everybody else in Detroit and in Michigan and in the United States. They want to show that they are a successful immigrant story. Here you have another picture. This is from the early 1970s. And you could see that there is a sense of pride, there is a sense of belonging, there is a sense of we are here, we made it here, we belong here, right? And like I was saying, Mexicans did not have it easy in Michigan, right? There is a whole system of informal and formal discrimination and segregation, and you have a similar development in the city of Chicago, and you have a similar development in other areas where the Mexican presence is significant at the urban level. So for them to show this type of activities, this type of sporting communities is going to provide a venue in which they can transition not only into the social life, but also the political life, right? They're not only trying to negotiate a social space in the city, but they also are trying to claim a social space for themselves in the American landscape. They want to play against the other immigrants, and they want to show that they are as good as anybody else. Here you have the Club Mexico, also in the early 1970s. And like I said, I interview the people that were still in Detroit, and they show a trajectory from which they evolved from being immigrants to being players to being homeowners to being representatives in social clubs to being representatives at the political level, right? And if you analyze, for instance, the people that participated as leaders in the Chicano movement, you can see that many of those leaders came from either a religious background or a sports background, right? If you analyze, for instance, the history of Corky Gonzalez, who was the founder of the Crusade for Justice in Denver, Colorado, he started his public and social life as a boxer, right? If you analyze the history of the founder of the Casa Acción Social in El Paso, Texas, Bert Corona, he started playing basketball in El Paso, right? So there is a very close connection between political leadership and participation in sports communities, right? Because in these sports communities, you're going to have a chance to show leadership for the first time. You're going to have a chance to participate at the same level with your countrymen, and they are going to identify who's the leader, who's the most representative, who's the most important, who can voice the concerns of the community in a better way, and they're going to move from there to propel the leaders to social and political levels. Now, the second era in this history of the Mexican sporting communities is what I call the transnational sports community. In this transnational sports community, what you're going to see is that there is a process of reconnection with the place of origin, and there is a process in which they are going to draft players from the community of origin to participate in these tournaments at the same level, right? That is, the level of the competition is going to be so much more difficult that they are going to be forced to look for athletic abilities not only within the pool, within the framework of the local community in Detroit or the local community in Chicago, but now they're going to look for talent, athletic talent to be recruited in the communities of origin. And in doing so, they are following the examples of the European immigrant communities, right? If you have a team from, in this case, the guys in red, they're a team from Poland, right? The guys that want to participate in these competitions are so invested in the competition that they're going to recruit athletes from Poland and bring them into the United States so that they can be successful at this athletic competition, right? The Mexican teams are going to do exactly the same at this period of time. Between the 1960s and the 1990s, they're going to start recruiting athletes from their communities of origin to come to Chicago, to come to Detroit, and to participate in these international tournaments, right? In other words, what we're saying is that they are bringing ringers, right? They are bringing ringers to the tournament in order to demonstrate that their story is successful and that they are a successful immigrant group in the United States. Here you have examples of teams in which they are no longer in their 20s, in their 30s, but they belong to a over 40 or over 50 soccer teams, right? In other words, once they start playing, once they gain access to public facilities, once they gain social recognition as collective institutions from the cities, from the park authorities, they are going to keep that access to the public facilities open for the rest of their athletic careers, right? In other words, once they are able to establish a permanent presence in these public athletic facilities, they are going to secure these venues for their teams, right, until they die. And this is very important because now you have a permanent public presence by people of Mexican descent in these cities that was previously denied to them as immigrants or as recent arrivals. So one of the members of this club that they interview is this guy named Saul Orozco, and he is the trainer of one of the teams that I interview, right? I practiced with them. This is in the late 90s, early 2000s. I practiced with them. I played with them some games. They were extremely competitive. They were extremely dedicated. They had a lot of practice time. They had a lot of sponsors from the local community, and they really wanted to win the championship at almost any cost, right? The reason I'm showing you this picture is that this guy is the coach, but this guy never, ever played soccer in Mexico, right? In fact, he wasn't even born in Mexico. He was born in the United States. And he is a former U.S. Marine Corps member, right? And he's a former boxer. But for him, he participates in the soccer team as a coach because he wanted to demonstrate that the Mexicans in Chicago were as competitive, athletically talented, and successful as any other group in the area, right? So this guy that is a boxer, U.S. Marine Corps, or U.S. Marine, right? He's interested in soccer because of the social value of the sport and not because of the sport itself. And I remember we used to train in the military base, right? We used to train in the Marine base. And you can see in his hat that he's wearing a Chicago Bulls hat, right? And this takes us to the next level, right? In the 1990s, there is a process that you could identify with NAFTA, that you could identify with the globalization process that is taking place everywhere else in the world, or that you can identify with the arrival of Mexicans in large numbers to the United States to the point in which they become the largest immigrant group in the country. And that is going to bring us to the global sport community, right? At this period of time, the 1990s, all the way up to the present year, you have the development of sporting communities that are no longer satisfied with securing a little park in a little corner on either Chicago or Detroit. But what they want to do is to show loyalty to the community, loyalty to Mexico, and loyalty to the Mexican experience in the United States on permanent and regular basis. So they are going to sponsor not a little team in the Patton Park in Detroit, not a little team in Houston, Texas, or not a little team in Chicago, but they are going to sponsor the Mexican national team to come to the United States and play against other national teams on regular basis as a permanent local team, right? That is, these people are going to make the Mexican national team the house team in the United States, right? And with that, you have the arrival or the development of this global sporting community, right? Because they're going to use the venues not used by immigrant Europeans in South Chicago, but the venues that are used by American spectators, right, at the highest level, right? What is the best stadium in the United States? The most modern, the one with the biggest screen in the world. The Dallas, right? The Dallas Cowboys Stadium, right? Do you know who opened that stadium? When was the first time that stadium was open to the public? Who played there? How many people think it was the Dallas Cowboys? It wasn't them, it was the Mexican national team. The Mexican national team inaugurated the best stadium in the world, right? Because of the power of these immigrant communities. They had enough money, enough interest, enough economic success to sponsor the Mexican national team in the best professional venues in the United States altogether. How about the best stadium in New York? Who can name the best sports facility in the city of New York? Soldier Fields in Chicago. No, Madison Square Garden, no. Exactly, right? The stadium where the New York Giants and the New York Jets played, right? It just opened in 2011, right? Who do you think opened the stadium? The Giants or the Jets? Neither. It was the Mexican national team. They opened the stadium, right? And they brought a full crowd to this stadium, right? Because at this point in the early 1990s, you have the Mexican national group becoming the largest immigrant group in the United States, and you have the Mexican-American population reaching the border of the 20 million, right? By now, you have at least 30 million people of Mexican descent in the United States, and they're going to be the ones who are going to take the concept of sporting community to the next level, right? Not at the level of dominating a little park in a little city, but at the level of producing and creating a professional sports franchise in the United States with the name of the Mexican national team. And here you have, this is an example from the Soldier Field in Chicago, right? You have this guy wearing the Chicago Bears, jersey and the Mexican flag. This is Soldier Field in Chicago. You can see the Mexican teams here, the Cruz Azul versus the Atlas. And I should tell you here that it is easier to watch any Mexican soccer match in the United States than it is in Mexico, right? Because in the United States, you have this enormous market for sports in which more than 30 million people are going to sponsor the broadcasting of sports with Mexican teams playing against each other in United States sports facilities. Okay, here you have a ceremony, an award ceremony of one of these barrio tournaments in Detroit. Okay, here you have another players, but this is the one. This is the graphic that I want to show you. Okay, this is the Mexican national team goes by the nickname of Tricolor, right? Because it's the white, green, and red flag that pervades in the uniform. What you have here is the Mexican national team games played in Mexico versus the Mexican national team's games played in the United States, right? Between 1923 and 1960, you have 11 games played in Mexico, 0 in the United States. In the 1960s, you have more than 40 games played in Mexico, 0 in the United States. In the 1970s, the Mexican national team started to play a little, just a little, in the United States, right? In the 1980s, the Mexican national team is playing more games in the United States than in Mexico, right? In the 1990s, that difference is even greater. By the 2000, the Mexican national team plays more than double the games they play in the United States, right? That is by this decade, you have the Mexican national team playing over 55 games in the United States with the sponsorship of these Mexican fans. In other words, what we're seeing here is the formation of a professional sports franchise in the United States with the name of the Mexican national team. They play as much games in the United States with as much economic benefits in revenue and sponsorships as any other professional sports franchise in the United States, right? They play more games in the United States than any other professional football franchise, right? You can name it, the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Chicago Bears or the New England Patriots. They only play in their house 7 games or 8 games, right? The Mexican national team play much more than that with even better economic results, right? And I was checking out because the Mexican national team played last week against Venezuela in the United States. And I missed the chance to attend the games, right? But the most expensive tickets went for $600, right? Don't worry because they play against Colombia this month in Florida, right? And if you have $4,000, you can have a chance to watch them playing at the field level, right? If you don't have that type of money, maybe you can watch them, from the top, right? But what we're talking about here is that we have a Super Bowl being featured with the Mexican national team on regular basis, right? What is the price of the most expensive ticket in the Super Bowl? Anybody? Okay, just check it out. It's not that you're going to be able to buy it, right? But check it out. And you're going to see that the Mexican national team is playing Super Bowls on a regular basis in the United States. So what we're seeing here is a process in which you have the formation of a global community, a global sporting community, in which this juxtaposition of symbols, national symbols, and capitalist entertainment industry is producing a third effect in which you have the formation of a network that can really recreate and satisfy their leisure needs, their leisure expectations, following the context and the rules of the global market, right? That is what started in the 1950s and 60s as a group of Mexicans playing informal games in desolated areas in the median of a street in Detroit, now has become the consolidation of one of the most successful sports franchise in the history of sports in the United States, and one of the most astonishing developments in terms of the history of national sports, right? People say that the Barcelona in Spain has become a brand, or that the Manchester United has become a brand, or that the New England Patriots have become a brand, right? But if you really want to look at the model of a brand, just check out the Mexican national team, because they play for a lot more money, they make more money, and they are more successful than any other professional franchise, right? Do you know who sponsors the Mexican national team in the United States? I'll give you some examples. Bud Light. And when Bud Light lost their contract, they lost their contract to Miller Lite, right? And another sponsors are the State Farm Insurance, Nike, and of course, the company that provides the jerseys for the national team, right? The Mexican national team wears jerseys in the United States provided by a German company, right? That German company is Adidas, of course, right? And they are the ones who sponsor the Mexican national team. And they have to do so because they want to have access to this Mexican and Latin market in the United States, right? If you see the Mexican athletes wearing Adidas when they play other international teams, you're going to want to buy these items. In other words, in sports history, you have many examples in which ethnic groups create a market, right? For instance, in the 1920s, Knut Rockne created a market for the Notre Dame football program by featuring the Irishness of the players, right? Knut Rockne created this idea that Notre Dame players were playing not only on behalf of a small university in South Bend, but also on behalf of every single person of Irish descent and Catholic affiliation in the country, right? That's what we call in sports history the subway alumni, right? These people that took the subway in New York City and went to see Notre Dame play against the Navy or Army, and they wanted to see the Irish guys winning, right? Because they wanted to prove that the Irish experience in the United States was a successful one, right? You also have the example of Joe Dimaggio with Italian Americans. In the 1930s, everybody that has Italian American descent follows Joe Dimaggio, right? Because he's the guy who's representing or portraying a positive image for Italian Americans across the nation, right? He's not Mussolini, he's not a fascist, right? He's not a bad guy, he's an American boy, right? In the 1940s, who do you have? Anybody? Who's the ethnic athlete that is playing on behalf of his ethnic group? Well, his name is Jackie Robinson, right? Jackie Robinson is playing on behalf of every single African-American family and individual, right? And he's demonstrating that African-Americans can play baseball at the same level, and then African-Americans can go to the ballpark and enjoy the game as everybody else, right? So what we're seeing here is not new, but the difference is that you see this as a permanent and regular feature, right? This is globalization. This is not the exception. This is now the rule, right? This is what's happening now as the rule. And that's a completely different landscape from what happened in previous times in the history of sports in the United States. So what we're seeing here then is the development of a permanent global network with intensive production of global symbols that are concerning national pride, the Mexican national pride in the United States, but also are using to the advantage of the Mexican communities the most sophisticated networks regarding sports entertainment industry, right? What we're seeing here is that Mexicans in the United States are in a position in which they can feature their Mexican pride, their Mexican heritage in a positive light on regular basis. Who's the most hated enemy of Mexico in soccer? Anybody?
Donovan, what's his name, Donovan?
I mean, in terms of teams, what team is the most hated rival of Mexico? No. The United States. The United States, right? So you're going to see that the Mexicans come here to play the United States, and that's the rivalry, right? That's the rivalry. And that rivalry, according to ESPN at least, is already in the process of outmatching or passing the rivalry between the White Sox and the Yankees, and the rivalry between Ohio State and the University of Michigan. Right? That rivalry is going to be here for a long period of time, right? Because behind that rivalry, there is a lot of people, and in capitalizing from that rivalry, there is a lot of money to be made, right? So this is the history of sporting communities by people of Mexican descent, and this is also a history of globalization in the world sports as we never seen before. Okay? Thank you. And you can turn the lights on. No questions? I'm still here. Yes?
I have one. Are there similar things happening with other sports in other countries around the world?
Can you speak louder?
Sure. Are there similar things happening with other sports in other countries around the world?
I mean, to the best of my knowledge, the only thing that comes close to this is the World Cup, right? But it's not the same. I mean, an equivalent in France of this phenomenon is that if you had the national team of Algeria playing in France on a regular basis and making more money than the French national team, right? But to my knowledge, there is no such an example that could be the equivalent in terms of the economic success and in terms of the market power of this development. Right? I don't see anything that is anywhere near this type of business in terms of the revenue, in terms of the sponsors, and also in terms of the success of the events, right? Yes?
I love your progressions, but I'm wondering, how do you interpret the ongoing existence of those sort of immigrant clubs, in Hispanic communities across the United States, where people are still playing for social and community respect? Do you still have that in your analysis with the building from one area to another?
Well, one of the ways in which scholars have analyzed this process is with this sort of a manly nostalgia, right? That is, they used to say, the people of Mexican descent used to get together, play together, celebrate together, and now they watch the Mexican national team on TV, right? But I don't think that's the case. I think the Mexican national team has a niche, right, in the economic and social life of these communities, but at the same time, the other processes are still going on with even more strength because they are also propelled by a national model that is not even local. I mean, because the Mexican national team doesn't play in one location. They play in Los Angeles one week, they go to Chicago the next week, they go to Florida the next week, they go to New Jersey the next week, and they become this example of global networks that no longer are rooted in a particular place, right? But they are, I mean, the way in which they are seen as is based on this interconnection, right? They are connected through the TV or through spectatorship, right? But they are no longer local. So I don't see any of these social clubs like losing in relevance or in importance or in social significance. I see the opposite. But now everybody wants to participate even more in these social clubs because they want to imitate the Mexican national team that for the most part comes to the United States to beat the United States. Right? That's the purpose of the Mexican team, to come here, fight the US, and then beat the Americans at their own house. Right? So you have the example of the female Mexican national team, right? The majority of the athletes are people born in the United States, right? But they want to play for the Mexican team. And that's, you know, you have a Mexican team that plays in the World Cup, but they are American citizens. And they don't see anything wrong with playing for Mexico, right? Because it's the Notre Dame recipe, right? But the difference is that it's happening at a massive level, right? It's happening everywhere, and it's being enhanced by technology, communications, and mass media. Yes?
What Mexico is a global sort of flattened panorama you're describing, but Mexico still exists, right? Maybe the market has been displaced and maybe the Mexican national team is now America's team, right? It's no longer the Dallas Cowboys. But how is this received at home? Mexican nationals who already have a somewhat complicated relationship with the people who have left, with Mexican Americans. They're kind of a funny middle group. What do the Mexican nationals do when they realize that their team has been sold and that they've sort of lost them and that it's not their home team anymore, but they're in the United States?
It is their home team.
Is that a problem?
I mean, what's going on is that there is a very strong issue with class affiliation and class membership, right? Because, as I was saying before, if you have $4,000 to see the Mexican team play in Colombia, in Florida, right? You're flying in from somewhere else. So there are people from Mexico that go all the way to Florida to cheer for Mexico against Colombia. And that's a sign, that's the status of membership, right? And that type of sports spectatorship is very similar to what we have now in the United States in terms of the National Football League and the World Series. I mean, who goes to the Super Bowl, right? Only very rich people that can afford, you know, the tickets, the package, and then they fly in and fly out. And that's how Mexicans are embracing the Mexican national team. It's a sign of, you know, status, right? It's a sign, you know, Mexico is now an international force, right? And Mexico needs us, Mexicans from Mexico, to go into the United States and cheer for them, right? And if you cannot go there, there's no need to worry because the team is going to show that match over and over and over again. So you have all these sort of you know, perfect storm that is being propelled by the media and also by the market force of the numbers of Mexicans both in the United States and in Mexico. Right? You have 30 million in the United States, you have 110 million in Mexico, right? And there is a middle class, right? I mean, Mexico is by itself, you know, the 11th or 12th economy in the world. There's a lot of rich people in Mexico that want to show allegiance to the Mexican national team just by flying in. Just as there are a lot of people in Mexico that go to the Super Bowl, or go to the World Series, right? This is a common, you know, site of the pilgrimage for rich Mexicans to go to the World Series, to go to the Super Bowl, to go to the NBA Finals, right?
Mexicans are very good Steelers fans for whatever.
Right, absolutely. I mean, they love the Steelers, they love the Cowboys. So maybe the Cowboys need to play in Mexico. But what I'm talking about, they already play in Mexico, right? They already play in Mexico, right? The National Football League is expanding into Mexico. They're expanding into England, right? Because they see how the sports franchises world is changing, is transforming in this very, very transnational and global ways. And they're already playing in Japan too, right? Okay, any other questions? Yes?
You talked at that first level about how immigrants wanted to assimilate to these local cultures and the immigrants wanting to cope and change into this society. But at this higher level, it seems like there's a more nationalistic and rivalry between the United States and Mexico. So is that, it seems like a big change between the two levels, that there's sort of like this search for an identity. What, for Mexican Americans especially, pick one side or the other. You're either with the Americans or you're with Mexicans. Does that create contention with Mexicans?
Absolutely, that's a very good point, because in the 1960s, 1970s, people analyzed, sociologists analyzed these immigrant associations as transitional institutions. They used to think, well, they are cheering for Mexico right now, but their children, they're going to cheer for the United States, right? But that is not the way it works. The way it works is they're going to cheer for something that really represents them as a successful experience. So what we're facing here is that if the Mexican national team keeps winning, they're going to be Mexicans. If they start losing to the United States, you're going to see a process of Americanization, right? Because you identify with the winner, and that's what sports are all about, right? Nobody wants to identify with the losers, right? Nobody wants to identify with the Vikings, right? Why not? Right? Why not? They suck. And yet, when they start winning, then you see this social visibility. They reflect my story. I am like them. I want to see myself reflected in their performance. Right? So this is all, that's a very good point, because this is all about how do you see yourself and your experience in this global trend, in this global world. You see yourself as a successful Mexican in the United States, you have to cheer for the Mexican national team, right? When they come here, only to get slaughtered by the United States, you're not going to cheer for them. I mean, I assure you that. Right? And it's the same, that's the way in which professional sports work in the United States. I mean, there is nothing more Americanized than that. The idea to side with the winner, right? Why people love the New York Yankees, right? Because they buy championships, right? Why people love the Pittsburgh Steelers? Because they have all the Super Bowl wins, right? So there is a process of assimilation, there is a process of Americanization, where the symbols that are being used, the symbols that are being incorporated, are being incorporated in this transnational and global